And thank you for the introduction. I have a couple of things to mention before I get into my slides. One of those is this is a tutorial, but it's not really going to be a hands-on tutorial. I thought about ways I could do that and have some activities you might be able to do during the webinar, but I think with having so many people with so many different backgrounds and who might be in so many different places if you are considering a private practice, I thought that would maybe be a little bit difficult to do. So I think the main thing that you're getting out of this in the sense of a tutorial is that there are a lot of resources that I'm going to mention to you and give you links to. Um, I do have a copy of the presentation that I will pass on to the organizers to distribute after the talk today. So you will have a copy of the slides available to you as long as you registered for the symposium. Yeah, and I guess we should mention this is part of the wider LISA 2020-2025 Global Symposium. We have a few tutorials happening throughout these 2 weeks, and then the main event is really going to be next Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So thank you all for joining me today. Oh, and if you came to my presentation during the weekly or the monthly LISA 2020 Zoom meeting, this is sort of an extended version of that presentation. So if you were there for that, you'll be getting you'll be getting that material again, but there are parts of it that I have extended and added to for the entire hour. So, all right. And I would, at the end, we should have time for questions. Please do think of questions that you have and that you'd like to ask me. I'm very willing to address a lot of different aspects of my practice, even if I don't cover it in the slides. All right. So, welcome. I'm going to start by introducing my practice a little bit. So I haven't really given a lot of background about what that looks like yet, but that will be part of this presentation. We'll cover that separately. I'll talk about what kinds of projects I work on and what contributions I make to those projects. And I'll talk about who my clients and collaborators tend to be. Then we'll go into some more detail on some things. I'll talk about when I started my private practice, what were some of the considerations that I had and things that I took into account before I really started, and what did I do to really make the transition. Then I'm going to spend some time talking about the process I use to work with each of my clients. It's a scalable process that works really well with one client, but also makes it so I can work with multiple clients simultaneously. Then I'll talk about some other considerations for private practice if this is something you're considering doing that you should take into account. And then I'll put up some key points and we'll have some time for questions. And I should mention there's a resources slide. There's two resources slides here toward the end, which is where you'll find all of the links to the material that I've mentioned during the rest of the presentation. So, oh, and I also want to mention, I'm not going to talk about statistics. This is maybe a little bit unique. I'm sure there are other talks that are going to be less technically based throughout the symposium, but I'm really not going to talk about statistics or technical skills at all during this presentation. This is really going to focus more on the other aspects of what I did in order to start my practice. You're, of course, welcome to ask me about statistics and technical skills and all of those things at the end. I just wanted this to focus more on the logistical side of things, and even the personal side of things a little bit more than technical skills. So um, let me tell you a little bit about my practice. It is a private practice. I say consulting and collaboration, both of those terms were important to me at the time that I started my business. We have a lot of discussion in my circle about how working with somebody who is not a statistician um, should be a collaborative process. And I'm not going to talk too much on this slide about what I mean by a collaborative process, but I really aim to be a partner to the people that I work with throughout their research process. And It's up to them how much of a partnership or collaboration that they want to have with me. But that really is my aim, is to not simply be, an analyst or a statistician who just comes on and runs some things for them and gives them some results, but to make sure that I'm seeing the bigger picture and part of the bigger picture. I also use the term consulting because at the time I was concerned that, if people were trying to find me and they were looking for a consultant, that the term collaborator might confuse them if they're not coming from a certain background. And we always talk about statistical consulting. I have since decided that that word maybe isn't as important to include. People don't find me according to how I've named my business, and the people that do find me, I think, would be happy to know that I want to collaborate. So in the future, I may take the consulting part out of the name of my business and out of what I consider the name of my practice. Um, but I did want to talk about that a little bit. Okay. My business officially opened in January 2016, which means I'm coming up at the end of my first 10 years, which is kind of exciting for me to think about and realize that I have managed to continue to do this for 10 years, and it's been a supportive career. It's been the only thing I've had to do for 10 years. And so I kind of see that as a initial mark of success, at least. So that's exciting for me. Let's see. My business has only one employee. It has only ever had one employee, and that is me. I am both the owner and an employee based on my legal structure. It's currently home-based. This is my house that you're seeing behind me, and it's all web-based. And I suppose there is some small level of phone communication, but for the most part, I work with all of my clients using web tools and using things on my computer. So this describes my business itself and kind of my background and what I think of as some of the key points. Now, in terms of projects and the contributions that I make, I tried to figure this out. It's a little tricky because the ways that projects come to me, it's not always through the same venues, and everything doesn't always become a full project. But just from my request form that I'll share with you later, I average about 50 new project requests each year. And I do have other projects that come to me other ways. Projects that I take on end up ranging from about one, and there's much more on the small hour side, to be clear, but they range from about 1 hour to 50 plus hours of billable time for each project. My activities that I do with these projects, I do answer questions for people who are somewhat proficient in statistics, but just kind of want someone to double check what they're doing. And when they have questions and small things that they're having trouble dealing with, that may be the extent of my participation in some projects, as they can bounce their ideas and thoughts off of me on those things. I help, of course, with study design. If people come to me early enough in their projects, I will help them put together a design for their study that will be statistically that will make sense statistically later when they're trying to analyze their data. And I would also say survey design and do help with some survey design as well. Of course, I help with analysis. There's a lot of my clients who really do come to me to have me do the actual analyses for their project. Um, and I'll go through the whole process of that, including reporting and interpretation, and whatever they're looking for from that process. Um, I do make a lot of authorship level contributions, especially over the last few years. One of my major clients that I came into contact with a couple of years ago was the veterinary school at NC State. Um, and they do a lot of I do a lot of long-term kind of project work with those clients, and I think during those years my number of publications that I'm a co-author on went from maybe two or three a year to I think 10 plus per year. So I do, even though I'm not in academia, I still value those contributions, and I think it's a way to take responsibility as well as credit for my work. So even though I'm in private practice, I still make a lot of authorship contributions. And finally, I do training. I have done much of this through other larger organizations. They might hire me to provide a workshop on a particular topic. Um, yeah, so that's what I do. It kind of it is a range of tasks, and there are other things, of course, that you can do as well, but these are the things that I focus on. I also want to talk about who my clients are. Um, and I do use the word clients. I think it best describes the relationship I have with the people who hire me. Um, and I have a focus on academic clients, and this is primarily because this is my background, and this is the group of researchers and people needing statistical work that I feel most comfortable with. And that's a lot of times it's students. It may be students that their advisors get in touch with me. There's several groups of students who are who are getting more advanced degrees online that tend to be non-traditionally aged students who need help with stats, and their school will actually tell them to come talk to me and do some statistical work for them. So I do quite a lot of that kind of work. I also work with some academic labs, so individual labs that are set up that regularly produce certain kinds of data and need help working with them, and individual faculty researchers as well. This is the majority of my client base in terms of, the number of projects that I have. I do want to mention that I also have some government and nonprofit clients. And also some corporate clients. The majority of these clients that I have met through my academic work. There's certainly not a focus for me. I will say that I charge higher rates for working with corporate clients than I do with academic clients. The government and nonprofit clients usually fall somewhere in between. And I want to point out, I guess I'll take this moment to say, yes, I certainly make a living with what I do, but this is not the most lucrative kind of consulting that you do. I think sometimes people hear that I'm a consultant and they imagine I make hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. And I think because I maybe have this focus on academic clients and they're somewhat limited by what they have and what they can ask for in a research budget. Again, I make a fine living. I am not concerned at all about supporting myself, but it's also not a pathway to getting rich, the kind of work that I do. So yeah, I want to clear that up because I think sometimes there's a particular conception that people have of what of the kind of money that you make, and that varies as much as anything else about collaboration. So I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about how I got started because I think people who are trying to create a statistical practice like this are most interested in knowing, where do I start? So I'm going to start by talking about my previous positions that I've held and my background, which is really where I think my qualifications came from to do this. And so, of course, I started with an assistantship. That was back in 2007 when I was doing my PhD. Um, this was not actually my primary assistantship. We did have some time that we spent in what back then was the Statistical Consulting Center at my university. I wouldn't say, though, that I really felt like I learned a whole lot about collaboration through that experience. It was brief and I never really led any projects, so I'd say it was maybe my first glance into what collaboration looks like. But for the most part, this is where I really learned my technical skills and where I learned how to be a statistical thinker and a data. We didn't have the word data science. Somebody probably had it, but we didn't talk about it that way back then. But I'd say this is where I really started to learn how to be a scientist who works with data. My next position, I would say this is where I learned some really good lessons about collaboration, particularly. I had a postdoc position that sort of melded into a research coordinator position in the forestry department at the University of Georgia. I was the only statistician in my team for like literally the only statistician that was working with my group. And they were definitely quantitative people in the sense that they took a lot of measurements, they understood measurements, they could think in terms of numbers, but the statistical pieces of it and how certain methods worked, they really didn't have the vocabulary of a statistician. And it took me a while to really understand that and really say, okay, I have to speak a different language when I'm here. And so that is mostly, I think, what I learned from this position that contributed to where I am. It really taught me that working with a non-statistician is very different from working with a statistician. And they're interested in very different things than a statistician might be interested in. And then my final position before I started my private practice was as the associate director of UGA's Statistical Consulting Center. And I held that position for about 5 years. Obviously, kind of running a consulting center was great exposure for running my own practice. Some of the things that I did there, of course, I trained students as part, and I taught as part of my position. And nothing is going to help you really solidify methods for doing things, especially since I taught a collaboration class. It was both statistical and in terms of collaboration. So teaching really helped me there. But also, I learned a lot of the practical administrative aspects of doing something like this. Part of my job was reaching out to the other people in the university who might come to the center. Part of my job was managing the budget and thinking about and making hiring decisions, which I don't even do now, and understanding how funding works. So a lot of the things that I learned there also helped me. And I would say this is also where I went from being in a very niche area from what I did in forestry to being in a much more general position where I saw lots of types of clients with lots of types of problems, and I applied lots of different types of models. So it really also helped me to be a generalist in terms of the types of statistical work that I did. So this was my background. And after that position in the Statistical Consulting Center, I think I was just realizing that the academic environment was not ideal for me, and I wanted to do something else. And one of my big focuses personally when I worked with clients was working with clients who were not very comfortable with statistics, people with very low level background in it who were maybe even a little bit nervous or anxious about working with a statistician. That was really kind of the thing I thrived at doing. And so I think I identified that there was a need for students and people who needed statistical help but didn't really know where to start, that was a niche that I fit in with very well. So that was the kind of person that I decided I would work with in my practice. So what did I do once I decided that I wanted to have my own practice? What was my next steps? And I love to share this picture when I get to a slide like this, whenever I talk about my practice. I think this was taken maybe the day that my practice originally opened. I had an office in a larger building of offices that I rented. And this space in here was all my space. And at the time, I felt like this was a good decision to have my own office. But I realized, and I look at this picture and I still feel very happy thinking about the day that I actually got started. But I realized as I was putting this together, this is not really representative of my practice anymore. The environment has changed. This is what it looks like now. As you can see, I took my sign with me from the door, but it's kind of buried behind my bags and a jacket. And as you might guess from the cat toy and the pet gate in the picture, I do work completely from home now. So the situation has changed a little bit, but the practice itself is going just as strongly as ever. So let's talk about, what were the initial steps that I had and what did I take into consideration? So I feel like I have to put this here as a step. The very first thing I did was have a discussion with my family. I'm not going to talk about this really in any more detail than that because I know everybody's situation is different and what this might look like for you could be very different. But I think it would be a little dishonest of me to not include this as a step. I know the only reason I really was able to get started and also maintained my practice for 10 years is because I have had the support of my family. They've um, been not financially, but in the sense that they gave me the space and the understanding and also the encouragement to be able to do this. So for me, this is a huge part of what I do. But let me then go on to talk about some of the, more direct steps that I took. So when I started, I was like, okay, I want to start a business that's basically going to be a small business. How do I do this? Like, what is next? And I did what I think a lot of us would do. I kind of just Googled it. And what do I need to do to start a business? And so. I think I was very lucky that I kind of stumbled into this small business development centers. This is a group in the United States. It's run by the U.S. Small Business Administration, which I'll provide a link to this at the end in the resources. But this was a great place to get started. Before I talk about the specific steps that I decided to take after looking at their resources, I want to mention, so the US has a small business administration. In the link at the end, there are some materials that will be useful to you about, starting a business and getting organized, no matter where you live in the world. There are some things that are just very general to business and sort of some common sense things. Um, the I also though found so some of this was specific to what I needed to do to legally create a business in my state. Um, if you live outside the US, I did take a minute to kind of Google this yesterday and see, there are a lot of countries have something similar to this. That's sort of again, we call it Small Business Administration. There are other names for it everywhere, but if you Google resources for small businesses in, and then the name of your country, you will probably find that there's an agency that's designed to help with it. So also check out the specific resources for your country. But again, like if you go to the US one, there's a lot of resources there that are just generally useful. And so after reviewing some of the information I found there and some of the resources, I decided on my next steps. And so the first thing was to come up with a business plan. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on a business plan today in the rest of this talk. I had to create a legal setup to make sure that everything I was doing was legitimate and I wasn't going to get in trouble for running a business. And then I also had to make my actual job transition. So how did I go from having my previous job to jumping into being a private collaborator? And now I'm going to focus on these last three steps individually a little bit over the next few slides. So the first thing that I did was to create a business plan. Now, I don't think at the time I used this template. I found this later on and I went back and did this later with my business. But this was extremely helpful. So I'm putting this template in the slide, but this template is available for free. The company, so this is the business model canvas. Um, it is available for free. If you go, and I have the link in my resources slides, but it's by Strategizer. So that's the name here at the bottom right. And if you go to the web page that I recommended in the resources, there's more information about this template and how to use it. There's a video there that talks about it. And there are other materials that are related to this that you can pay for that are really helpful. This was not expensive, but this was where I learned about this actually from this book, Business Model Generation. And if you look up the book, Business Model Generation, you'll find it. It's also on Strategizer's webpage. But even for a small business like what I do, that seems pretty simple. Okay, I do stats and people pay me for it. There's more to it than that in terms of really thinking about how you're going to deliver what you do, who is going to really be your clients, and how you're going to earn money from that. So some of the things I really want to focus on is well, for example, let's look at key activities. That's this little box here. Key activities is things that you actually do. So this would be things like, okay, what are the actual tasks that I do? Well, in my case, like It's those things I outlined. I can help you with your study design. I can help you analyze your data, all of those things. Key resources are things like, all right, what do I need to have on my end to allow me to do this? And for me, it's things like software, which are business expenses and things you have to think about, which I'll talk more about later. I think one of the key things for me was thinking about this value propositions box. So when you think about value, this is referring to what is your value to your clients or to your, and they use the word customers here, but I prefer the word client. What is your value to your clients? And that's not just they don't know statistics, so I do statistics for them. What makes you different or what is specific about you that may give you more value or different value than what is currently available to the people that you might be working with. So these are all really important things to think about. And I'm not going to go into a lot more detail right now just because I want to make sure I go through all the material. And this may or may not be something you're concerned with right now, but if you're considering starting a business, and there are other business plan structures you can use as well, but I found this one really helpful. This is a different kind of thinking than I think we're used to doing as data scientists and statisticians. Um, and so this is really useful to sit down and really think through each of these pieces to decide, whether you have a sustainable plan for your business. So again, there's a link to this on my resources slide. The next thing was my legal setup. Again, I didn't want to get in trouble for having a business, which is definitely something that can happen, I think, no matter where you are. There's going to be government structures and things in place so that you need to make sure you do in order to be legally responsible for your business. And so, in my case, on the small business administration page that I linked to, they have a lot of information. And I learned a lot about different business structures. I had some ideas in my head about what I wanted to do, but honestly, the more I read about it, the more I said, this is not something that I'm really prepared to do by myself. I'm going to need some more guidance and some more help with this. So after I learned about business structures, I paid a lawyer to create my business structure for me. And this is something I wanted to emphasize a little bit. As a statistician, I am asking people to take their research and something that is something they've conceived and something that they have put a lot of time and energy to, and I'm asking them to share that with me and allow me to work on part of that with them. So I realized very early on, if that's what I'm asking other people to do, it's totally reasonable for me to do the same thing. This is my business and something but I can't do the whole thing by myself. And so there are certain tasks and things that I do that when I learn about them, I realize that I maybe don't quite have the ability sometimes to do it. I don't have the time to do the thing as well as I want to. And so it's worth it to reach out and collaborate with somebody else the same way people are collaborating with me. And the other thing I think is the big message here is invest in your business. If this is something you're serious about and it's something that you want to support you for a long time, there are some places where it's worth it to even financially invest in your business, to invest your time and your effort and your money into upfront. And this is definitely one of those areas. Make sure that you're set up to legally operate a business. Right. And my final piece before I actually started was making the actual transition. I'll be honest, it was kind of scary. I was very excited about it, but I also knew I was going from a position where things were really, at least they feel like they're pretty stable. I was making a regular paycheck. There were good things about where I was at the time, and now I was moving into something that I thought could be extremely rewarding, and that I was really going to enjoy, but was not stable at the time because I was just starting it. So what are some things to consider when you're making this kind of job transition? The first thing in a private practice, I thought about my work location. Where do I want to work? And at the time, as I mentioned, I did have an office. I had an actual physical office that was And in my town, it was not quite downtown, but sort of downtown. I think that's the best I can describe it. In a really well-used area. And at the time, I think that was what I needed in order to make that transition. I now work from home, and this is now the better situation for me. I'm happy to answer questions about this later, but I won't spend too much time on it. And I think so, you have the option of having an office, you have the option of working from home, and then I don't know how common this is all over the world, but at least in the United States, we have what we call co-working situations now, which is where you may be able to have a desk or a a small area inside a larger building that is really just there to give people a space to work, but not an entire office. Um, so it's like you can go somewhere professional and do work, but it's less expensive and it's not entirely your own space. All right. So there's options for where you're going to do this. Then the second thing was, did I want to leave gradually or did I want to leave all at once? And just separate completely from my old job at one point in time. You may have the option to leave gradually or transition gradually. You may not, depending on what your current job is. Um, with a degree in statistics, a lot of places you work are pretty flexible in terms of allowing you to do outside consulting. If you're in an academic world, at least in the United States, there's a lot of opportunities for outside consulting. Some companies will allow you to do certain things on your own time. And if you can do that, if you could start your practice and start putting things into action the way you're going to while you're still working in your other job, that's a great option. I did not intend to do that. I intended to leave kind of all at once, finish my job, and then start my new one. But the way it worked out when I left, they asked me to stay on a little bit longer. They weren't able to hire someone that they thought would be a good replacement for me. And so they asked me to stay on part-time to help tie up some loose ends. So really, my previous job ended up being, in a way, my first new customer. So that actually worked. It ended up working pretty well, and I'm glad I did it that way. But that's something to think about is how would you transition to your new position? And a really important part, of course, is being financially prepared for this transition. Even with the work that I was doing for my former job, I certainly had a decrease in income during my first year. I don't know if this is something you can avoid entirely. It might be if you have a ton of work waiting for you already, and if you've got a lot of things lined up, I suppose you could, in theory, avoid it. But I think in practice, it would be pretty difficult to not see a change in your income for at least some period of time. So do be at least financially prepared for that kind of transition, whatever that means for you. All right. So that was kind of all the things I took into account before I got started. And I'm going to transition into kind of a separate section of the talk now, which is the process that I use to work with my clients. And this is not only a good process for um, working with an individual client, but it scales up really well to work with multiple clients at the same time. And it also feeds into future work. So it really does keep my practice going on a larger level that I use this process with my individual clients. So I'll go through each of these steps individually. But what I do is my work with an individual client usually starts with a request from a client. I'll talk about each of these individually. I will meet with them and discuss the project. If there's additional work to be done, I will um, I will put together a proposal for that work for their approval, and we'll make sure that we're on the same page. I will perform that work, and I will follow up with them after it's completed just to make sure they have everything we need. There is a payment step that's pretty important for me being able to keep everything going. And then that can lead to some new projects following the end of this work. So let me start with the request part. The first part is a request for assistance. So when my clients come to me, they make a request for assistance. I'm going to actually show you my webpage. So this is my webpage. If we go to the home, I'm still working, I'm rebuilding the home page a little bit. So this is very basic, but I send my academic clients to this page with general information. And there is a link they can use to actually make a request for assistance. But I want to stay here for just a second because this page is really set up for people who might want to work with me to understand what I do. It's really important, at least for the kind of clients I work with, to understand they don't work with a statistician on a regular basis. This is not something they have experience with, and they're not really sure what to expect. And so it can really ease the process if I kind of lay some things out for them and help them understand what this could look like before they actually commit to even asking for help. So on this page, if you look through it, you can see I really describe who I work with. So I talk about what kind of help I offer to people. Um, I do also note a little bit things I don't do. I make sure that I indicate that I don't write dissertations. Um, Unfortunately, maybe I feel like it's kind of common that people who run the statistics part for student, a lot of times they'll also offer to write like a section of their dissertation for them, um, which that's sort of a little, at least to me, it's ethically questionable when the person is presenting it as their own work. So I choose not to do that part. But I do reassure, of course, that my goal is to make sure that you understand the work I can do so that you can complete your own work. But I do set that expectation up in advance that I'm not going to write this portion of your dissertation for you. I described the actual meeting process, and I think this is important to do because I actually met with a group yesterday who asked me to give a presentation about working with a statistician. Like they didn't want to know about how to do analyses or how to do this themselves. They wanted to know what they should do to prepare to work with somebody like me, and I gave an hour-long presentation on this yesterday. People really don't understand what it's going to be like. And I think beyond that, we all have our own ways of working. Um, we all have our own ways of working with clients, and they really don't know what to expect, and that can really affect their experience. So, I really try to set up expectations here for what they will what will happen when they talk to me. Back when I had a physical office, it was important to me to have a picture of my office on the webpage for anyone who came in to talk to me in person, that they knew what that would physically look like to help make them comfortable. And then I also, for academic clients, I put my rates right on my webpage. Again, I feel like this is usually one of the first questions I'm going to get anyway. I give all my academic clients the same rate. There's no reason to keep it a secret. So that information is right here on my webpage. And I make it very clear what kinds of things I will charge for, and when things move into authorship. So all of those things are here on my webpage for people to read about. Then there's the actual request. When they are ready to request a meeting, um, they can click here. There's a form. Again, my webpage is available. It's going to be one of the links in the end, and you will have a copy of this presentation. But this is the information I ask for. I ask for their name, a way to contact them. Because this is specifically for academic clients and I do give them different rates, I ask them to tell me what institution they're at. I ask who they are. Are they a student? Are they a researcher? Are they faculty? That helps me understand a little bit, who I'm working with and what their experience level is. I ask them to tell me where they are with respect to their project. These different parts of what they're doing are going to mean that they're going to ask me very different things when they come talk to me. I ask them to tell me about their research question because that's kind of the crux of what I'm going to end up doing with them. I ask them to tell me if they've collected any data already, and to give me a brief description of that. If they have a deadline, that's going to be really important. Sometimes I'll get a request from somebody and then deadline listed will be the next day. And obviously that's not always realistic, but I will check in with them to see what do you really want by tomorrow. So asking if they have a deadline is really important. I ask them about data storage, mostly to make sure that I'm not violating any contract they have about what they can do with their data. Um, and then I ask them to agree to a couple of policies. So I cannot store personally identifiable information. I don't have the protection to do that. I don't have the security to do that. So I ask them not to send me personally identifiable information. And a lot of studies will involve an IRB, that somebody they have to get approval from before they can do their study. So I let them know that the IRB part is their responsibility and that I reserve the right to not work with them if I believe they have not gotten the proper permissions for their work. Um, I ask them if they have any questions for me before they get started. And I ask them how they learn about me. And this form has been working really well for me. This form has been working really well for me. It gives me a lot of good information about who's going to come talk to me before they come talk to me. All right. So I'm going to pop back into my presentation. So this is what I ask people to do um, when they make a request. I'm going to close that. Okay. Other clients, I have them contact me by email. Um, So, like if someone has been referred to me who works for government or nonprofit or for a corporate group, the considerations that I take into account, I don't just have one rate for those clients. So it's a more detailed conversation. So I ask them to email me directly. Okay, so that's just the request. Next part, we move on to a meeting. I have an initial meeting with all of my clients. I don't work purely by email ever. I do want to at least talk to my clients or maybe see them in a Zoom meeting. But I don't charge for the initial meeting. And a lot of that is I want them to feel like they're not obligated to me. This it could be we have this meeting and it may not go well. They may not be a client that I want to work with, or that I feel like I have the tools to work with. They may not want to work with me after we talk things through more carefully. So I just like this to be a no pressure situation. I can also imagine that if I meet with somebody and they end up not wanting to continue working with me, it will become more of a burden for me to track down their $50 or whatever they would have paid for this meeting than it will be worth to me. So I really don't charge for this first meeting. When I meet with my clients, I use something called the Power Process by Doug Zahn. There are lots of meeting structures that you can have, but it's really important that if you're someone who's going to be sort of running a meeting, that you have a process for running a meeting that you could use in different situations. Otherwise, it's really easy to forget pieces, to leave a meeting without everything you need, or to not communicate well with your client during that meeting. And so I'll just talk about what the power, it's an acronym. It stands for the 5 different stages of a meeting. And the P stands for prepare. It's things that you do before your meeting to make sure that you're ready for the meeting. Open has to do with how you start your meeting, and it's things like checking on the time, asking your client what they would like to do during this meeting and what would they like to come away from the meeting with. It's sort of like setting up your agenda and making sure you're on the same page. You have the work portion of your meeting if you are actually that's where you kind of focus on the tasks that you agreed on when you opened it. You always need to leave time to end a meeting. I am really bad at this unless I'm really aware that this is something I have to do. I always get to the end and it's like, we have 2 minutes left. What do we need to do with this 2 minutes? So consciously leave some time to end your meeting, make sure that you've wrapped everything up and plan some next steps. And then you have the reflect portion. When your meeting is done with your client, it's not really over. You still have to gather everything together and make sure that you're in the right place to continue that process with that client. So make sure that you have some kind of structure in place for a meeting if that's something you're going to be doing. All right. The next step after you have your initial meeting, if you're going to be doing some ongoing work with your client, is to put together a proposal. This may be something that you came up with during the meeting, but it may be something that you go back and put together more formally after the meeting as well. And so For me, a proposal has basically, I think it's three things that I identified. You have an outline of your tasks. You have an estimate of time and budget. That's going to be really important to your client because they need to know whether you're within their resources. And when I budget, by the way, I always do projects hourly. I don't personally set up a contract that covers an entire project for a set amount of money. I'll be happy to take questions about that, but that's what I do. And then you have to make sure that there's a timeline. If you say you're going to do certain things, but you don't put a timeline on it, you haven't really agreed to anything. So always make sure that you give them a timeline or a deadline. And occasionally I sign a contract. This is actually not super common. A lot of times I'm working directly with individuals, but sometimes I do need to have a contract set up with, for example, a university if something's coming out of a university budget. I don't personally have a contract that I ask my clients to sign. Our agreements are generally informal and they're written in email, and I do ask them to agree by email to the proposal that I've given them. All right, the next step is the work. Um, if they have agreed to a proposal and I'm going to be doing work on my own and not really continuing to meet with them constantly, there are some things I have to think about. One, of course, is tracking my time. This is how I charge. So it's really important to make sure that I track my time accurately, and it's fair to my client to make sure I track my time. It's annoying. I was not used to doing this, necessarily coming from an academic background. I didn't have to keep track of how long I was taking on any particular project. But again, extremely important to do. There is a tool that I use to track my time that's going to be in the resources page, and I'll share that when we get there. I make sure that I stay in contact with my clients as I'm working. If we need meetings to answer any questions or if they want to add something else, I will meet with them to talk about that. And whenever we change anything about the scope of the project, we renegotiate. That's important to remember is if you're working hourly. I had someone that I said, all right, this will take me about 2 more hours to do. Is that okay? And he said, yes, of course, that's okay. I did the 2 hours. Then he said, oh, well, you didn't say I needed to pay for it. I thought it was obvious, but honestly, like what I think is obvious isn't necessarily obvious to my clients. So make sure that you've laid out all of your terms very obviously as you work with them. All right, then there's follow-up. Once I've completed the work, of course, I need to send them my final report. It may not end up being final, but I need to make sure that whatever product I have agreed to give them, I send that to them. Always when I do that, I invite questions and feedback. It's never, here's your report and here's how much money you owe me. It's here's this report. Please take a look at it. Let me know what questions you have. Let me know, what you still need. Um, and then if they don't have anything else they need or they don't have questions, I gave them the opportunity. If I don't hear back from them immediately, of course, I want to check in at appropriate intervals. I don't follow up usually the next day, but a few days later or a week later, depending on who the client is and what I know their time is like. And sometimes when I'm doing this follow-up, this turns into a new, they'll say, hey, why don't we look at this? Or, oh, why this isn't, exactly what I was thinking we needed. Let's go back to the drawing board. And sometimes this turns into a new proposal and we go back to that and do some more before I'm finished with this client. Assuming that we're done, of course, there is the part where I have to invoice them and get paid for the work that I did. This is another thing I have a specific tool for this that I use. Well, an invoice can look like a lot of things. I have found it really helpful to have a program that creates invoices for me in the same way every time. Some people don't care about a formal invoice at all. Some people are like, oh, just let me know how much I owe you and I'll send it through Zelle or whatever it is. Um, but I still create an invoice. Part of it is official record keeping, and part of it is it just helps to look professional. And I do take credit payments. I do pay to take those credit payments. I pay a percentage, and I think again that's just part of providing a professional atmosphere for my clients, rather than asking them to go through some way that there's no fees. It's not worth saving the little bit of money that I would save. Um, if somebody doesn't pay, this happens very rarely to me. Honestly, my clients usually pay. If they don't pay, it's because they didn't get an email. or because their school is taking a long time or whatever it is. I think I've maybe had two clients that I got to the point of sending an invoice and they did not pay it like over my entire 10 years. So at least for me, this has not been something I've had to worry about very much. But when someone is has not paid or is taking a longer time than I expected, I will follow up with them to ask, to make sure they received everything. Occasionally, you do have to do that. And then the last step is their new project. And for me, one big question is always where do I get my clients? For me, it's literally either new projects with the same client, which is why it's super important that they're happy with what I do with them. And I try to form relationships with my clients. So a lot of projects will come from the same client, and we'll start a new project, either immediately or a year later or 3 years later, whenever that happens. I also have a lot of referrals. This is where a lot of my new clients come from, is referrals from previous clients. I don't advertise outside of work. And so again, like this whole process and making sure that everything goes smoothly along the way is really essential to being able to do this for 10 years. So moving on, there are some other considerations. After I put this other considerations page together, I realize it's mostly a list of things to consider for expenses. This is making sure you're taking care of yourself since you're not employed by somebody else. And so those things are taxes. Make sure that you're set up to pay your taxes. I work with an accountant. This is another one of those areas where I don't feel that I have the expertise, or even I don't want to do this. I don't want to file my own taxes. So this is an area where I pay somebody else to take care of that. Insurance. In the US, at least, health insurance is usually done through the person you're employed by. I also need to have business insurance. We have errors and omissions insurance, and we have general liability insurance, and I need those things to operate. A lot of times, universities that I work with will put in their contract that I need to have a certain level of coverage there. So this is something else you have to think about when you're running your own business. A web page. You saw my web page. Um, Personally, I really kind of believe a web page is essential. It makes people feel like they have a home for you. I have some functional things on there like my forums, but even beyond that, I think the world we live in now, if I can't find a business online, like if all I can find is a phone number, or an address or an email address, but I can't find a web page for them, um, I don't necessarily feel like that's a company that I'm going to want to work with at this point. So I think having a web page is essential. I designed my own web page. It's not great, but it's functional, and it's professional. This is easily an area where you could pay somebody else to set up a web page for you. I think you could maybe for a while use a free service to post a web page through another domain. But I feel like it's been important to have my own web domain, and really not and then just put in the extra money to make that happen. Software. Fortunately, we have R when it comes to statistical software. And R is free. It took a long time for me to learn it, but once I started my own business, I realized I wasn't going to be able to pay for the software I had been using. I do pay for SPSS. A lot of my clients use SPSS, and if I were to do a cost benefit analysis to see, is it worth the price? Am I making more money because I paid for this? And the answer would be yes, for sure. I do not pay for SaaS, even though that was software the software I used the most before I went private. We have to continue learning. We want to continue to have professional development, and I do this I still love a good textbook. It's maybe a little old-fashioned, but I still love learning from a textbook occasionally. I will attend conferences. I make sure that I attend conferences in the area of statistics and data science. So I see what my fellow statisticians are doing and developing. And I do take workshops and tutorials on specific things when I need them. And finally, retirement planning. I want to retire. I love my job, but I want to retire. And so this is another area I have a financial advisor that I pay some fees to make sure that I have retirement accounts. And it's been worth it. It's been it's been worth way more than whatever I'm paying them to do this. Um, I this is not something I would want to do myself. Again, you may find there are certain areas that you really want to manage yourself and others that you don't. And so all of this comes down to these are all expenses and things you need to take into account. You are going to have to become a budgeter. If you do not have a budget that you regularly keep up with, you are going to have one. I have a spreadsheet with my budget, but I know we're about out of time. So I'm not gonna actually share that. But you need to make sure that you take account of all of these things. The key thing is being able to list out all of your expenses in advance, think about what they are. You may not be right on every single one of them, but at least take a guess, know what all of your potential expenses could be, and keep track of where you are throughout the year with those expenses to make sure that you know how much more you need to earn, or if things aren't matching up, so that you know what it is that you can cut and you're making informed decisions about it. So budgeting is extremely important when you're running your own business, both your business budget and your personal budget. So we are at the end. I want to show you the resources slides because this is really the part that you're taking home with you. So I have links to the Small Business Administration and Small Business Development Centers in the US. I have the business planning canvas I shared with you. There's a link to that. I have some information about Doug Zahn's power process for running a meeting, which is very flexible, and you can adapt it easily. My time tracking tool. This is Square that I use for invoicing and payments. I have my webpage, which I think has a lot of good information on it. And I have, some key points. I know we're at the end, so I'll just go ahead and put these up, but I think um, gain experience before you start. People are like, where do you have clients? Well, I have clients because of who I met and who I worked with before I started my private practice. Make your business plan and revisit it. Make sure you're on track. Be deliberate about forming a legal structure. Again, you can get in a lot of trouble for running a business that you haven't done that for. Have a process for your meetings, but stay flexible in that for your clients and work with them in ways they like to work. And maybe the biggest key point is invest in your business. It's investing in yourself. Budget for the long term. So that's it. I know we are right on time. I was hoping we'd have a lot more time for questions, but I ran over. So.
Well, first, let us all thank Dr. Kim Love for her excellent talk and all the resources she shared that you guys can take away with you um, for yourself in the future. We do have a couple of questions that came in the chat, so I do want to have Kim address those. And then if we have a couple more minutes, people want to stay on, we can have time for additional questions. So the first question is, what are the consequences of starting private consulting as a part-time while we have another full-time job?
So that's a great question. And at least for me and in the areas I was working in, there were very well outlined policies at my other job that said literally a percentage of your time that you were allowed to use for outside consulting. And there were policies describing what that could look like. So in your current job, you may find that there are policies surrounding it that you can just go to and review and make sure that you're following them. If there aren't, um, I would advise asking about it. I know, the reality is you're either going to do it and you're not supposed to and you didn't ask and you'll get in trouble, or you'll ask and find out you're not supposed to. And at least you'll have that information. It's still better to ask than just go ahead. Otherwise, of course, you do have to, it is tough. Like you're making choices either way. If you have a full-time job and you're trying to add consulting on top of it, you now have a full-time and a half job. And this is why I have felt like I had to put that discussion with your family part as one of the steps, because you're either going to be affected in your time or in your money or both when you're making that transition. I think it's really difficult to do it any other way.
Thank you very much. The second question, if you are a co-author on the project, do you still consider that as a billable project?
This is a great question. And there's a lot of debate about this in academia. Back when I was at the consulting center, people did not want to put us on as co-authors all the time because they said, I'm paying you for this. You shouldn't be a co-author. I said, my thought on that is, are you paid for research? Is your time being paid for from a research budget? And are you also a co-author? And the answer is usually yes. Obviously, I'm not as that rude about it, but I think it's important to us to understand that our contribution is equally valuable. We're not, make sure you don't take over a project or feel like it's all you doing the work, but at the same time, you are as equal a partner as anyone else working on that project. And so if other people are receiving payment or compensation and they're a co-author, there's no reason you shouldn't consider yourself to be at that level as well. So I want to put that out there first. The second thing, though, is I have sort of approached this by dividing my things into two different types of tasks. There's the tasks where I'm actually performing work and getting answers and making sure my collaborator understands those answers. And then there's the other piece where I actually contribute to the manuscript. So I will take what I have done for them if they feel that this is a worthwhile contribution, and I will actually write it up for the manuscript. And I will review the manuscript critically, and I will make sure that I have approval over the final manuscript. Those are things that I do for authorship that I don't ask for additional payment for. So I've kind of, again, divided it into two separate pieces. If they want me to do anything directly for the manuscript, once I touch the manuscript, I ask for co-authorship. Otherwise, I will not do that piece. And I hope that makes sense. I saw someone asked if my clients involve students, and yes, I definitely work with students. I do require that their committee is aware of the fact that they're working with me. Otherwise, it results in all kinds of issues. Yeah.
May I have a question, Dr. Kim?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kim, for insightful talk. It provided practical insights, lessons, and strategies from your experience as an independent statistical collaborator. The idea of private statistical collaboration would be helpful, particularly for ones who graduated in statistics, but due to unemployment, basically in developing countries, unable to have a job. My first question is whether you choose only those projects in which you have already sound background of statistics, or except even if you have not expertise but you specifically learn, and in that case how you charge. My second question is if a student who has just graduated in statistics whether can do it, and what you advise him or her for capacity building in statistical analysis techniques and also in the softwares, etc. Thank you so much.
Okay, so there were two questions, I think. The first one is, what do I take on projects where I don't know the technical aspects, where there might be an analysis involved that I'm not familiar with? I think one thing to keep in mind is my clients, the ones that I work with at least, do not usually come to me asking for a specific analysis. They come to me with a problem, and then it's how do I help them answer this? Sometimes that does involve analyses that I realize I'm not familiar with. And so, what do I do in that case? It depends a lot on the client. Usually, if it's a brand new client that I've never worked with and they're presenting me with a problem that I'm not familiar with, I will always be upfront about that, first of all. I don't misrepresent the skill set that I have. That that can be hard when you're new and you're really desperate for clients. It can feel difficult to represent yourself properly. But it's something that I've really gotten pretty comfortable with. If it's a new client, I will often see if I know somebody else, if I have someone in my network who is more familiar with that skill. So I can say, hey, this person already knows how to do this. Then I get good connections with my network. The person gets their answer, and at least they have a positive impression of me. So sometimes that will happen. If I don't know anybody else who does that, I will present that situation to them as well. I will say, I have asked if other people are aware of how to do this. I haven't found anyone who knows it. I'm willing to learn this skill, but it is a learning process, and it may take more time. Um, I do not charge differently for that. Because if nobody else is doing it, somebody has to put in the time, and I see that as part of the project. But I'm very upfront about that, and I let them know that, there will be some extra time in here to learn about this technique, and are you okay with that? And if it's a client that I've been working with for a long time, these things usually aren't an issue, which is why I mentioned someone I've never worked with before. If it's someone I've been working with and I have a relationship with them and they're already very comfortable with me, I'll tell them, yeah, I'm not really familiar with this. Assuming though that you want to go ahead and do this, it's going to take this much time for me to learn about that and do this. And it's really hard to know. So I try and give them an overestimate, but a lot of times those clients are really happy to say, yes, I trust you, and I'm happy to continue working with you, and it's something you're not as familiar with. So that's my answer to the first question. I do charge though for that time. The things I don't charge for is if, like, I give an estimate, I thought I knew how to do something in R, and then I go to do the programming and I realize, oh my gosh, I haven't done this for 100 years and it takes me twice as long as I thought. Sometimes I'll use my own judgment in that, and not charge for all of the time that took me. But I feel like that's my own fault. Second thing is a new graduate. I personally don't advise trying to start on this right out of school. This was my experience. I learned so much about what I needed to know through having my postdoc and through the job that I took after that. I don't think that I would have been able to do this and keep it going for 10 years if I had tried to do this right out of grad school. I think it was really important to have some real world learning experience. And also, that's how I met people who became my clients. I always, again, people always ask where my clients come from. And they came from the work that I did before this. I identified a niche. I knew people that would want to work with me. I had a few specific individual contacts that I thought would work with me or refer people to me. So I think I personally would have had a really difficult time getting started right out of school, just with the technical skills that I had at that point. I know other people who started right out of school, and I think they probably struggled more than I did, but they also found a way to keep going, and are doing well. So I know it can be done, but it's not a path that I would recommend.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Well, I know we're about 10 minutes over time, but there are a couple of questions left in the chat. If Dr. Love has a few minutes to respond to those.
Yes. So let's see. I see the one that is it advisable to finish the project before getting paid, or is it preferable to receive some percentage of the payment at the start of the project? So for me, this is really related to specific projects and specific clients. Many of my projects are very short. Um, a lot, like some of my student clients, I have one school I work with where everybody has the exact same type of thing they need done. They need very specific results. And I have a pipeline for getting it done. And I knock out one of these projects in about an hour. So for me, trying to ask for payment up front, I think it would make it harder on some of my clients. I think they would be less willing to work with me. And it's a small amount of money if I were to lose it for one client. And I always said, if I ever don't get paid, I will change how I do things, but it has not been a problem. So for some of those smaller projects, I don't invoice upfront. I don't have any percentage of the payment down. Um, and with my clients with my university clients, I have a contract with them, so that's not an issue for me there either. And I don't charge up front. Um, some of my clients, Okay, again, I actually never charge up front. Let me just say that out front. I'm like, who would I do this for? I really never do. Um, but I also, because this is because of the way my clients come to me, they're referrals. They're people that I understand them and I know where I know where they live. No, not really. But there a lot of my clients are long term or work closely with people I've worked with long term, and they always pay me. And I've always said that if this doesn't happen, I will change what I do. The other thing, though, that I do is there's some clients that I have longer term projects with, and it's broken into parts, and that's part of the plan. I will charge as I go for some of these bigger projects. Um, but again, I personally haven't needed to charge up front. If I found my clients in different ways and I didn't feel like I knew them as well and wasn't as familiar with how they work, um, I might charge part of the project up front. I feel like that opens a different, well, I use the expression opens a can of worms in the sense that, if they're not happy with me, I think that's when you get into litigation, and it's something I can avoid by not charging up front. If someone's going to do litigation, it's going to be me. But um, I certainly don't advise that for everybody. I can easily see situations where you would want to have a down payment up front. What other question was in the chat?
The only other one is, what advice could you give for a remote jobs related to statistics for a professional statistician?
Mm. Um, so I am assuming, and I don't know if this question is like, how would you find a remote job? In which case, my job, no, even in my job, what I have noticed is that where I live, I feel like there's a lot of people who work remotely, but there's not a lot of jobs that are advertised as remote jobs. And I think the way that people end up in these jobs is they work for a company in person on site first. And then they it's a the way I think it works now is that you kind of prove your value on site first, I guess. And then um, after some time, a lot of companies become more flexible in how they let you work. Tanya, are you actually in that situation yourself? I know.
Yes, that's exactly what happened for me. I worked on site for many, many years, and now I'm fully remote after, as Kim said, proving myself.
Yeah, exactly. So I think just from the people I have worked with who work remotely, it's usually that kind of situation. Um, I was going to say one other thing. In my case, obviously I work remotely, but also it's like remotely from where my business is at my home. So it's not remote in that sense. I'm just separated from my clients. But even I like got into being able to do this because I worked on location at a job first. So I wish I had some great advice and like a way to find a remote job, but I haven't personally encountered that it usually works that you go right into a remote job.
And I believe that's all the questions we had received for today. So everybody, thank you for staying a few minutes more to hear some great answers to some questions you had. And thanks again to Dr. Kim Love for such an excellent talk.
Thank you.